And I could see within his eyes that he was there to stay. He was faithful as a brother. He was faithful as a friend, looking for a lasting city, faithful to the end. Even when the road grew rugged and the sky turned black, trusting in his King, he had no thought of turning back. In the midst of persecution, with his dying breath, magnified the one who kept him faithful unto death. He was faithful as a brother. He was faithful as a friend, looking for a lasting city, faithful to the end, looking for a lasting city, faithful to the end.
Welcome to Plain Talk About Life in the Bible. Continuing this week with Pilgrims Progress by John Bunyan, and I hope you enjoy it because I do. Last week we left off with our two companions who really weren't friends, formalist and hypocrisy. One went left of the hill of difficulty, one went to the right of the hill of difficulty. Our Christian, our hero, went straight up the hill of difficulty. The other two were lost, one in the woods and one in the mountains. And Bunyan, when he's writing this, makes up this little poem. Shall they who wrong begin yet rightly end? Shall they at all have safety for their friend? No, no. In a headstrong manner they set out, and headlong will they fall at last, no doubt. See this idea again that formalist and hypocrisy said to our hero, well, we're all in the way. And the answer to that is no. We may all be on our way from this world to the next world. We're not all on the same path to Mount Zion, to the celestial city, to heaven. People say, well, I found my own way to heaven. Well, the problem with that is each man does what's right in his own eyes when there's chaos in the world, but God prescribes the way to heaven, just as he prescribes it here in Bunyan's little allegory. And God, the Almighty, has the right to say, this is the way it'll be, Bill, and you must do it my way. I've given you signposts, I've given you a path to follow, and you be advised to follow that path. If I start to deviate from that and make up my own mind about how things ought to be, then you have the same right. You can do whatever you think is right. Pretty soon we'll have 1,001 ways to get to heaven. And in some cases, people actually say that to me, that they believe that there is an indeterminable number of ways to get to heaven. And they say, how arrogant of you, Bill, to say there's one way. And I always, if you're a Christian and you run into that question in one form or another, you ought to always remind your person who you're speaking with that you didn't make up the one way. The best you can say for yourself is that you discovered the one way, or it was presented to you, or revealed to you, or something like that. You certainly didn't make it up. You found it. It was Christ who said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So when I repeat what Christ said, I'm not saying something that I've made up. He's made it up. So who is he to say that? Well, you see, the distinction is he's the creator of heaven and earth. When the creator of heaven and earth says there's one way and only one way, what would be arrogant is not to say there is one way, but it would be arrogant to say there was more than one way. You see, the very person who's accusing me of being arrogant because I'm exclusive in my demand that Christianity is the way fails to understand that it's not my undertaking to find the way to heaven and say there's only one way. It's Christ's statement that there's only one way. When I repeat his statement, the person isn't quarreling with Bill Moore, the person is quarreling with Christ, the maker of heaven and earth, and eventually that very person's judge. Do you see the distinction? If I made it up, it would be crazy. I'm just some moron living in the 21st century. But if I repeat what Christ has said, and you can look it up for yourself in John 14, well, then I haven't said anything. I've just repeated what he said. So then the next question should be from that person, well, who is Christ then, and why would you trust what he said? That's a legitimate question that Christians don't seem very able to answer these days. When I say he's the creator of heaven and earth, someone has the right to say to me, well, prove that to me. And, of course, as a Christian, I think there are proofs that the one who made that statement, that there's only one way and that he is that way, and that which necessarily means all the other ways that people think there are don't really exist. They're all dead ends. They're all, remember the hill of difficulty? They were either, people ended up in the forest or in the mountains. They were all off the road and into destruction. Why? God has a right to say it. God came to earth. God made that claim. God died in the sense that Christ was crucified, and he resurrected. And therein lies all Christian proof. This idea that Christians don't have any proof for their beliefs is just absolute idiocy. Maybe we're not very good at giving proofs for our beliefs, but they're there. And we need to understand that as Christians. He was seen after his resurrection by Peter and by the 12 and by over 500 at one time and in various other groups while he walked the earth for 40 days. And if you'll remember, in Corinthians, Paul says, if you don't believe it, go find these guys. They're still alive. Go ask them what they saw with their own eyes. You see, had it been some sort of a conspiracy, Paul would not have had the freedom to say to these people, go find these people. They are alive, most of them at least. You can ask them. It's 15 or 20 years after the crucifixion that Paul makes his statement. Had there not been any truth to Paul's assertion, certainly people would have done that exactly. They would have gone, found those witnesses, and found them to be liars, and we wouldn't be contemplating the claims of Christianity today. Now, I say all that because recently I've just read a really good book on explaining Christian truths to unbelievers. It's called Reasons for God by a man named Tim Keller who has a church in New York. Wonderful book. But I want you to think about this before I go on with Bunyan's allegory. There really are three kinds of people that you run into. One is the irreligious person who has no beliefs at all, according to him. Now, I will tell you that the irreligious person does have beliefs, and he is, in fact, a church member of his own church, the Church of the Irreligious. Now, they have beliefs, and they don't have any proof for their beliefs, but they have plenty of assertions. And if you can understand that they are just like you as a churchgoer, the only difference is they're always pointing their finger at you and saying, why do you believe this? And prove it. And what you need to do is turn that finger around and say to them, prove to me God doesn't exist. Why do you believe this? There's no coherence to what you believe. It's really insanity what you believe. It's just pure nonsense with no reasoning behind it. Because they accuse Christians of having no reason, when in fact they're the ones who are devoid of reason. Christianity has always had reason on its side. Unbelief is what doesn't have reason on its side. The tables have just been turned because we're not very astute at conducting these conversations. I say this, so we have the irreligious, then we have what Keller calls the religious, which are the self-righteous, prideful people who populate the church, like formalists and hypocrisy did, who pretend to be on the way, but aren't. They're just members of the church, but they're not Christians. You see, they call themselves Christians, but they aren't. So we have the irreligious, the religious who are really irreligious people hiding out in the church, and then we have the gospel converts, who are the true church, part of the invisible church, those people who are now citizens of heaven while they're yet people on the earth. Those are the people who are members of the true church. The problem is they're mixed in with people who pretend to be Christians, and so we call it the church, and people say to me almost daily, I hate the hypocrites in the church. And I say, I do too. And they say, what do you mean? I say, well, I hate them too. The church is full of them. Worse than that, I'm hypocritical. So now we have the real hypocrites who are just pretending for the sake of their business or the sake of their girlfriend or something else to be a Christian. They have no interest in Christ. They just have, maybe they think it makes them look a little better in the world. And then you have Bill Moore, who, meaning to be a true follower of Christ, is still a hypocrite in a lot of the ways that he lives. And you have to endure that. The church is certainly a hospital at best. It's also like a dog pound sometimes to me. It's got some pure bloods in it, and it's got a lot of mongrels, and it's got a lot of dogs that were fathered by Great Danes and mothered by dachshunds or something. I mean, the church is a mess sometimes, but it's still closer to heaven than any other place I've been. And God has made it a place for weary pilgrims to find comfort and to find joy. And that's where Bunyan's about to take us. In the story now, our hero has left his false companions behind, and he's climbing up this hill, first on his feet, then on his hands and knees to the hill, up the hill of difficulty. And I think Bunyan's trying to remind us that the Christian life is full of trouble. There's internal trouble and external trouble. Internal trouble would be of the variety where you're constantly reminded of your sinfulness, of your own shortcomings, and you have to go back to the doctrines of grace to find any comfort. External kind of trials are you lose something, your health, your wealth, sometimes your family. If you remember in this story, our hero lost his family at the beginning. They wouldn't follow him on his way to heaven. You can see that we hate to lose anything. Our reputations. I always thought it was of no account to me if I lost my reputation until someone tried to steal it. I didn't mind if it was truthful. I always hated the fact that somebody tried to steal it from you. It would always be a false accusation. I realized how much it did mean to me. You probably have felt the same thing. The other side of this is something we need to understand about the hill of difficulty. This is a gauntlet we run through as Christians. Life, this isn't heaven. It's a place you run through. Remember in Hebrews it says to run the race. Why? There's a beginning to the race and an end to the race. And in between, you sort of get to run this gauntlet where one thing after another beats you in the head and knocks you down. You lose your money, you lose your friends, you lose your wife, you lose your job. And then there's a moment where you catch your breath and you get a promotion, only to lose your job again. And the stock market goes down 700 points in a day. And, you see all of these tribulations, and people want this to be peaceful, and they want this to be a place that they can enjoy day after day after day. And it's never that way. Why? It's a garden full of thorns. It's not a garden full of roses. There's an occasional rose, just a garden full of thorns.